Hi-ho, API review here. All right, and that's enough Kermit the Frog voice today. Uh, um, yep, so welcome back. We have Red again, because why not? Um, so, and we're starting late, so we'll just jump in. All right, revisiting async file I/O for Win32 overlapped 24847. Mr. Tobe,
Yeah, so
welcome back.
this was thank you. Good to be back. So this was the API that was approved while I was off parenting. Um, I have the general shape I'm totally happy with, but I have some naming concerns. One primary concern and then one secondary concern. My primary concern is I don't think we should be using the word scatter or gather anywhere in these APIs. I don't think it adds any benefit to do so. I think there's negative value. So I believe we should just remove it. And then the second one, which I know Jeremy disagrees with, but we get to talk about, is I don't think we need the at offset part either. There's a file offset parameter that's required in all these APIs. So I don't know what the at offset is adding. And if you get rid of both of those things, then you end up with these very nice random access.read, random access.write, or random access.read async, random access.write async, concise method names that match the same read-write methods that we use everywhere else. So that's what I think we should have. The reason I don't like scatter gather is a multitude of reasons. First, those names are obscure. They come from some other languages / platforms. Very few people know what they mean. They don't show up in any other .NET APIs. We have socket.receive and socket.send that take multiple buffers, and they don't use that terminology. And in .NET, we generally just overload by data type. Whether the method takes a span or an array or a memory, it's just an overload, and this is the exact same thing. On top of that, even if you did end up using scatter gather, a read scatter method from the OS, whether you could do so whether or not you were taking a list. Like we could decide we wanted to split a single span up into multiple pieces and then use one of those scatter gather methods. Similarly, we could take a list, rent an array, copy everything into the array, and do a single read or write on that one buffer without using scatter methods or without using gather methods. So it's an implementation detail that doesn't need to show up in the name. That's my spiel.
That's fair. I'll go ahead and defend at offset, so we can start with both sides of that. To me, I feel that, especially with files, that the read already has a very strong notion of being positional. And one of the things that had been discussed while we were doing this was that these would be instance methods off of, say, file handle, and then when we decided it needed a new type, instead of being instance methods on the handle, there was a discussion of should they be extension methods. And I think that as instance methods off of a file handle, or methods off of file stream, if we also added them there, which I don't think we would, that it has too much of a bias for the positional read. And even though there's this extra number argument, if you're a code reviewer, you just see that there's this third argument and you don't know what it means. And so I think that the add offset to be different from positional read is actually beneficial, but I don't care a whole lot.
My counter argument is, so I can get that as an instance method and maybe as an extension method, but the decision was made that they're not. So you're calling this with random access.read. Random access is right there in the code that you wrote. You have to specify where that random access is, and look, there's a file offset that you have to pass.
Right. And so I think if we get rid of it, then the we could make it an extension later, that we should be more hesitant to do so, because part of it was we can make it an extension later, so we don't have to decide that now, instead of deciding no, it will never be an extension method. So
That's fair.
And this would be an extension method on safe file handle specifically.
um,
So not file stream or
right.
anything like that.
Yeah, because file stream, I think it would end up being, even with the add offset, it would probably end up being weird because we already have the desynchronized position between the handle and the stream. So I mean, we could try it, but it would be weird.
For what it's worth, I'm also I understand the arguments about add offset, but if you really wanted to denote file offset, I think it should be at file offset, because there are, as you said, there are other offsets that it could be confused with. There's nothing about, if you're going to ignore the argument name that it says file offset, then the fact that you're saying at offset could be I'm reading into the buffer at that offset rather than I'm reading from the file at that offset. So I don't actually think add offset helps.
Fair enough. Really, for me, it's you get the read and write from read and write, and then it's like, and I'm different, so like go figure out why I'm different. If it was called readex, that would be satisfying the same meta concept for me, but with a worse name. So.
Yeah, I would say like for me, read and write, like we have this bias that read and write have side effects, right? And I think if they are purely static methods, I completely buy the argument that read and write are just simpler names and it's still pretty obvious what they do. But I also have to say I was never a fan of them being extension methods in the first place. I still find it very weird to have read and write methods off of a handle. And I think doing it off of the file stream, in my opinion, would be worse, because if you talk about a file stream, you kind of, there's an implicit position on that stream. And if you add new extension methods now that take an offset, basically completely ignoring the current position of the file stream, that doesn't belong on file stream at that point. So I feel like the design as we have it here, I think kind of is set in stone. Like I would not make them extension methods in the long run, but I think I said that last time, but I also feel like I was in the minority. So I just feel like if we want to make them extension methods, I kind of agree with Jeremy, but if we really want the simpler names, I do agree that random access.read and random access.write is just a much, much nicer API. So I guess it depends on what the rest of the room wants to do in the long run.
Yeah, if we feel comfortable aligning on the position that we will never make them be extension methods, then I agree with the static invocation. You're doing random access.read that says you're doing something other than a normal read, and that it does call it out by itself. My concern mostly is my recollection is we hand waved and said we could always make them extension methods in the future, and that's how we solved the extension versus not debate last time. So now basically we're resuming that with naming policies.
For what it's worth, I wouldn't lose any sleep if we did make them extension methods and had them called read and write. Like they're still a file offset parameter, but I don't think I actually like them as remaining as static methods. It is weird in .NET to have operations on state handles, like as instance methods.
Yep.
All right. Since no one seems to be defending the alternative position,
if we ever wanted to make them extension methods, would it be the end of the world if we had them named read at offset as extension methods, but random access.read, meaning the same thing?
End of the world?
I
No.
mean-
Worthwhile? Meh.
Yeah, I mean, like adding basically the extension attribute on the first parameter is kind of not bloating the metadata, just duplicating the entire API surface purely for having extension methods. I think at that point you get into the realm of like, you pay a lot to gain very little. I mean, to me, extension methods usually make sense when you want to make something discoverable. But as Steven said, and I think I made the argument last time, I don't think people expect shit to be on file stream. Sorry, save file handle. So I'm not sure that would actually help.
We also said this is a pretty advanced scenario, right?
It is.
So
It is, and I think if we go into random access.read and write, the amount of characters you have to spell is very little. So I mean, effectively, if you make them extension methods, you basically save the random access thing. But I don't know if add them to the method name again with add offset, you're basically down to the same amount of characters. So.
I just meant, do we need advanced APIs to be super discoverable?
Yeah, I mean that's another question, right? I feel like at that point it just becomes like the people that want to do them, like do they syntactically like the code they're writing, right? And I think that becomes a style thing more than a substantial debate. I think Tanner mentioned last time that he likes having interop extension methods over his safe handles, right? But that seems to me like, okay, that's the way you want to write your code, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily the way we, I don't know, promote or advise people to write interop code, right? So I don't think it's the norm that people expect it to be like that. It's not to be said that it's wrong. It's just, I don't know, if there's a very strong cultural bias towards a way, then we should make sure that that is reflected. But just because you can write something like that doesn't mean we have to be able to support it. And if somebody really feels strongly, I mean, nothing prevents you from writing your own extension methods. So it's, yeah, you missed one in the middle.
Yeah. Apparently, when I did replace with nothing, I accidentally did replace with space. So.
That looks so much better to me. Thanks.
Now that I'm seeing it, I agree.
Okay. All right. Everybody agree with my reasoning?
Yep.
All right. String try copy to span.
All right, so this is a simple one, hopefully simple. We're starting to see more and more code where you're manipulating stuff with strings and spans, and if you're building up some span with lots of different things contributing into it, you're frequently copying strings into those. And right now you have to write string.asSpan and then use the spans copy to or try copy to. It would be both simpler and faster if we didn't have to go through that as span in the middle. String already has a copy to method. I think it's copying into an array or something. So this is basically adding a copy to and try copy to that copy into a destination span. They actually already exist internally now. It would be making them public.
Okay. Would we want to make the array version equally easy?
As
You mean-
an extension method off of array?
Yeah. Well, because I feel that if you have an array and you want to copy it to a span, you still have to do array.asSpan.copy2.
Oh, I see. I don't know. I haven't hit that one as much.
Okay. I mean, we can say it's a different case, but it feels it's the.
I mean,
the
with,
very
with
related
array,
question.
with array, you typically also are copying some subset. So you'd have to say, generally with string, it's frequently that you're copying the whole thing, and if you need to copy a subset, you do string.asSpan, offset count. With array, at least in my experience, it's much more common that you need to copy a subset, as you would with buffer dot, copy or whatever that API is. And so you'd be using the as span anyway to narrow it down to the subset. But that's just based on frequency.
Yeah, so my experience matches Steve's. Like generally when I'm involving array in a copy, generally I have span.copy to array as my primary scenario.
Also, array.copy2 is static, right? As opposed to an instance method, so it's already self-defined.
Right. Well, I mean, we could memory extensions add a copy and try copy to T array to span of T.
But so then we'd have copy to span, but not copy to array.
I mean, I guess the assertion here is we already had the string copy to array. So
Yeah. Yeah.
So can someone? I mean, I'm not sure whether Stephen mentioned it, I just missed it, but like, why is that a perf improvement? Like, shouldn't this be effectively the same thing now?
If the JIT could completely unwind the as span and figure out everything about it, then it wouldn't be a perfect improvement, but it can't completely get rid of it today. Regardless,
span is trivial. I think. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that one I buy. It's just it always saddens me when we do things that seem somewhat unnatural on the library side just to make things faster, when it just looks like a trivial inlining. But
you can not focus on the perf, just focus on the usability.
yeah, no, I have zero objections to the API. It's just like I'm wondering, like, why are we? Like, I thought that as span was super cheap.
It is, but it's doing unnecessary checks, especially if you have an instance method hanging off of string. You would expect non-null, right? That's the better code gen that Steve was pointing out in the issue.
Oh, I see.
So
And you remove the intermediate call to as span, which people might not know to do.
why is this an instance method on string rather than an extension method over, say, iCollection? Is it just for the optimization of directly being able to get the index?
I would never use an extension method for the purposes where perf matters. We would never want to use the extension method on an like collection. Right? That'd be bad.
Yeah, I was about to ask, like, how does that improve perf? Because now you're either going to interface dispatch or you have to do type checks. Neither of which seems super fast.
So the current string copy to, which you did highlight here, takes a source and a length, and the one that you're suggesting is just copy the entirety. I mean, I'll assume the answer is yes, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Is really the majority of the cases that you're seeing where it's just take this entire string and copy it at this destination?
In my experience, yes. You're building up some result based on various inputs, and at least from what I've seen, if you were dealing with a subset, then you usually already have it as a span. That you already have that subset as a span. And if you're not dealing with a subset, then you usually have it as the original string.
Should this be returning the number of characters written in case the span is too large, or in case the span is larger than the input string?
I mean, I was basically copying what we have with span already. Like, this is the same signature as span.copy2 and try copy2.
Yeah.
Right, but doesn't the so with the other copy2, you have to give it an explicit count, and so you know that it's
Oh, you mean the string.copy2?
Right. You have
Yeah,
to give
but-
it a count, and so you know how many characters are being written.
But I mean, it's string.length.
Right. So yes, we have the foofy rule, which is like span writing things should return the number of things written, and then there's a hand wavy like unless the answer's obvious, which is how we said that span.copy2 was okay, since we wrote the rules after the fact. Certainly my preference is like our calling conventions eat the return register anyway. Like, we may as well return the count from copy2. If we want the try copy2 to not have the out for jitty perfy reasons, then I guess that makes sense. But and then the copy2's obviously throw if destination's too small, and try copy2's return false.
Yeah, it's other than the null check, it's the same semantics as span.copy2.
Yeah. So
like I said, we already have this internally in corelib and use it in corelib. There are a multitude of places we would go and delete the as span from other libraries if we were to add this. If we don't think it's worthwhile, then we'll keep it internal in corelib. But it seemed worthwhile.
I mean, again, I have a slightly higher than mild, but not quite too strong preference that we turn that void into int. But if we want to say that string and span are so close to the same thing that they should have matching signatures, then I'll shrug.
Yeah, and I don't have a strong preference on that one way or another, because we can, if you're using this in perf-oriented code, we can always make the code gen do the right thing, regardless of what type we return.
I mean, is there any downside to returning int? Like, I mean, it seems like if you need it, it's very neat if it does it, and if you don't care, then you just ignore it.
Our normal copy to methods don't tend to return ints. We tend to return ints when we have like try write, but our copy to methods generally just return void, because it's generally expected that the caller knows how many elements are written.
The binary primitives methods in span.copy2 are void. I think literally everything else returns the int, because we wrote guidelines after that.
For copy to?
Okay, there's only one copy2, and that's span.copy2.
Yeah, because I know
stream.copy2.
try write definitely returns the number of elements written. Like we do that everywhere.
Except for span.trycopy.
And
Sure.
vector of t has a copy too, as well as the other vector types, and we don't return the int there because we assume that size of vector of t or vector of t dot count, depending on if you're talking about the byte or the other one overload, is correct. So I guess maybe we don't need it here.
Yeah, I mean, is that one also void, or did it have a better answer?
No, it just returns void.
Because especially once you have to think about which version of the thing you're calling it, seems useful. But
Yep.
Yeah. The general guideline, as I recall, what we wrote down was span writing things should return unless the return is being used for another reason. But
I
again,
mean, what is nice with returning int is it's literally drop-in replacement, right? You can just shorten span.copy2 to just copy2. If you make it void returning, then that might be cool, but it stops compiling.
No, because the span one is already void. So this is...
Because the span one is already... Oh, the span one is void. I thought the span one was the one that returned int.
No, it's the only it's the thing that doesn't return int. All the rest of all the newer span writing methods return the int.
I see. Then I stand corrected. Okay, then I don't care.
Yeah. All right. Symmetry it is. And is someone monitoring chat? Because I still have a progress bar on loading chat.
It's
Sort
empty.
of.
Okay.
YouTube chat is empty, if that's what you were wondering.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, today is build, so we will probably not get a lot of audience.
Yeah.
Turns out Satya singing is more entertaining than Jeremy singing.
Satya is singing.
Satya sang.
No, I'm just saying.
Oh.
Like,
I was like, I'm gonna have to go watch the keynote.
See, Amo, this is a good way to lose quorum.
I didn't even try to troll you. I thought it was obvious that I was trolling.
I have seen weirder things happen at build in the past.
I will agree with that. Although nothing stops Blizzard. Like, when the Blizzard announced the mobile World of Warcraft, that was my favorite big conference moment where things went south very quickly. Never seen so many people so upset.
Not being a gamer, what happened?
Basically, everybody expected it to announce an actual World of Warcraft game, and then they basically just announced the mobile version. Everybody was so underwhelmed, and the executives expected a big reaction that is positive from the audience, and it's just very awkward silence, and people get very upset, and it's just not, like, go on YouTube and search it. It's a chilling moment.
Nice.
And then there was a follow-up comment from Blizzard that was basically like, do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. That's pretty good.
All right.
And yes, Steven, I think you're right for the comment in chat. I think it was Diablo, not WoW.
Oh, Diablo, yeah.
Yes, I hesitate to admit that I know that as well.
All right. Consider deprecating or annotating a few X509 certificate members. 47977. Jeremy. Oh, hey, that's me. All right. So, as part of Net Core 1, we redefined the X509 certificate and X509 certificate 2 types to be immutable, except that they're disposable. Whereas .NET Framework had instance import methods, so you could replace what one certificate looked like with another, which, while I've never heard of anybody actually doing that and making the universe implode, it felt like a very weird design. And so as part of Net Standard 2.0 unification, we brought the methods back to core, but stuck with the immutability, so they've always thrown in core or not existed. And now that we're obsoleting things, it seems like we should mark them obsolete because they don't work and we don't ever plan on making them work.
Sorry, I don't understand is immutable on this platform referring to .NET Core then?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not OS specific, right? This one would trigger on all operating systems regardless of where. And so you're saying import is not supported at all today?
Import is not supported on .NET Core or .NET NA Core.
And so we always throw platform not supported, basically? Well, are we saying it's supported on Windows but doesn't work on Mac or Linux?
I'm looking to see if it's platform or just not supported. Platform not supported exception.
So if they unconditionally throw, I think obsoleting makes sense.
Yeah,
if they only throw over one platform, then we shouldn't.
The only platform they don't throw on is Framework on Windows.
Gotcha.
Possibly Mono. I don't know what the Mono runtime did, but in Core and therefore .NET 5 Plus, they don't work. So.
I mean, that makes sense. So basically, we're just exposing the behavior we already have. So this is not a design. It's more like can be inform the customer that this will not work.
Right. So then,
I think that makes sense.
Once we make those obsolete, now the fact that we don't have import, there's not a reason to have the default constructor because that was basically so that you could new something up and then call import. We decided never to make that scenario work because it's hard to tell that versus you created something, then you disposed it, and then you rehydrated it. So then the next round in this is obsolete the default constructors, because if you call them, all you're going to do is get it looks like it was disposed certificate, which you probably don't want. And then while we're disposing things, we have this private key property on X509 certificate 2. I have been answering on Stack Overflow since I joined .NET. Don't call this property, basically because it doesn't work with in .NET Framework. It doesn't work with CNG backed private keys, and so this is the thing that always gives back RSA crypto service provider. People hard cast it to that. That's why we had to make the new methods in Net 4.6, and so we've been telling people anytime it comes up, don't call this. So now we're just putting obsolete on it to match, which says call get private key, or if you were using the setter, which was terrible, then there's a method for that too. And then similarly on this class called public key, we have a thing that returns asymmetric algorithm, which we don't like. We added last week the get public key methods. And then now,
so they're on public key as well. They're not on certificate.
So we've already had for a while cert.getRSA public key, and what we added last week was if you called cert.public key and you're looking at that instance which represents its public key, now you can do .getRSA public key off of that as well.
That must have been Friday because I don't remember that.
Yeah, it may have been Friday. So then the last two things are actually an interesting thing to debate that somebody may have an opinion about. So we have these two properties, archived, which means something. I don't know what it means, but it means something. And friendly name, which is just a name that shows up in the UI or this property. The the getters return false and I think empty on Unix, and the setters throw on Unix. Where by Unix I mean anything other than Windows. And so then it's so Kevin points out we should paint these as supported platform. I don't know if we should paint the whole property or just the setter or what, because the getters are sort of senseless, but like there's not really harm in letting someone call them if they're just like logging. So maybe just put it on the setters.
That's why I was about to ask exactly that question. Like, if the getter doesn't throw, I don't think we should mark the entire property.
Yeah, we made the
I mean,
getter
for
return
archive,
something
it
for
kind of
logging.
makes sense to say it returns false. Like, I mean, it's a sensible thing. I think for a friendly name, you may be able to argue and saying, well, if it returns an empty string and you log it, that might not be super useful at that point, right? You might actually lose information, and then later on you find that your log is empty and you're very upset or something. But I will generally say if something works and it just has a sensible fallback, for example, if you have a get printers method and the enumeration is always empty, then marking this whole thing as supported only on one platform is kind of defeating the point, right? Because the API was designed to have a fallback in it, right? And so I would prefer to only make the things annotated and warn when they throw at runtime, really do something that you didn't intend. And I think on the friendly name, I'm undecided. I don't know exactly how it's being used.
Yeah, it returns the empty string because that's what Windows returns if you haven't set one. So,
in that case, I would probably still just mark the setter. And then hopefully our analyzer handles that.
fair enough. All right, so that's all the obsolescence plus moving to supported OS platforms.
A quick nit regarding the obsolescence messages on X509 certificate. Those messages would say call a constructor on X509 certificate 2, correct? Like, aren't we generally pushing people toward that class?
Yeah, I mean we can change it to say use the equivalent constructor on X509 certificate 2 instead.
Yeah, I mean, I would let you wordsmith that however you think is appropriate. I just wanted to make sure my understanding was right, that we were pushing people toward the derived class, generally speaking.
Sure.
And this would have whatever the next syslib obsolescence is in.
I guess that's a question: is do we care about? Do we want a number? And I think last time the answer was yes.
Yeah, when in doubt, the answer should be yes. I think in this case it makes sense to me because they're all related to the same thing, right? And once you have more than one, I think it pays for itself. Just pluck a number from the vending machine and
Yep.
Yeah. You hit the button that says diet syslib on the vending machine and it gives you full calorie syslib and everyone's very sad. This is why I don't have an aspiring stand-up career.
Well, you're more like the Marvin of stand-up comedy, right? Marvin, you saved us all. I know, it's terrible.
Wasn't that Alan Rickman in the film version, or at least the film remake?
I mean, it better be because Alan Rickman is awesome, but I don't recall. But yeah, that seems like an Alan Rickman job.
The Disney version, not the BBC version. Yeah.
Amazing character.
All right, move those down added some words in the old class. Oh, I missed one. Yeah, that one's fine because it's used different. All right, cool. I think that covered it. Cool. Thank you, Kevin. All right, add blittable color to system drawing 48615. Do we?
Is Jeremy here? I can probably pull him in real fast.
He's not.
Yeah, I think we should ping him or Santi. I can kind of go over this if neither of them are available.
I'll ping him offline real
Santi's
fast.
out.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, Santi has new responsibilities.
Yep.
I believe the phrase that we use, and I'm sorry, Steve, is on vacation.
You're funny.
Yes, as everyone knows, new children are definitely a vacation. All that extra sleep, those relaxing hours, those midnight snacks.
It was appropriate that there was a baby in the background just a few seconds ago.
Yeah. The only thing that I have to say about this one, because we may just skip it and come back, is there's a fun quote specifically about this one, or about arg B in the book.
So I missed it. What's the rationale for the new type?
Basically, we have a color type today, except that color type is incredibly inefficient, like most of these system drawing GDI plus wrappers, in that it tracks the underlying bytes for the color, it tracks a string, it tracks a known color type if it's one of them, and some other metadata. And for most scenarios, you don't need all of that. You just want the color, and so you want a struct that contains the 4 color components.
So logically,
this is.
Can I think of the existing color type? If we were to introduce this, can I think of the existing color type as being changed to contain a color ARGB plus that other stuff?
I believe so. I believe this is compatible, but I'm recalling this from memory and not necessarily exactly how color's implemented.
Okay.
But so the proposal is basically, let's expose a color type that's compatible with the byte representation of the GDI color and make it a value type. So it's very clearly just the color data you want.
And in terms of matching GDI, is this a case where we're tying it very closely to Windows, or is there literally nothing else layout-wise that we'd care to map to?
So as far as colors are concerned, there are 20 million different formats and representations.
Right. Yeah.
In particular, the 2 most common are RGBA, BGR, or I guess the most common are RGBA, BGRA, and then ARGB. GDI in particular, which is what WinForms uses, the rest of System Drawing uses, and everything else is ARGB. And so this just matches that so that it can be used by WinForms and anything else using System Drawing. I think if we were to expose a type on System Numerics, we would probably do RGBA instead and have it be floats rather than bytes, just because that's more generally useful for modern code and performance related to color algorithms.
So who would benefit from this? Like, I mean, clearly we're not changing WinForms all of a sudden to use them everywhere, right? So like, who's actually asking for that? I think Jeremy filed it, but like, who's the prime consumer of this type?
It's going to be used for pinvoke and stuff internally with and internally to WinForms, as far as I'm aware.
Well, but it seems
It-
even there's like a proposal for two. There's color ARGB, and then there is the interrupt type RGB.
I don't get that ARGB enum thing. Why
Yeah,
wouldn't
the-
you just use uint in the signature?
the enum shouldn't be required. We should. Oh, actually, it's likely because the actual API takes a uint on the native side, and structs and uints aren't compatible, and they just want a type def. That one's not actually. I don't think we should expose the enum there.
I will say that I
That should
learned
just be an
that
internal thing.
on the what is it S390X, that this struct and this enum do marshal differently, even though on x86 and x64 they marshal the same.
No, specific.
If it stores itself just as this uint, then it would.
No.
Okay,
So-
it kind of
so-
worked when I did it. So
So most of the time it works, yes, but strictly speaking, they are not compatible types at the ABI level. And in particular, if you have a this call, so an instance member like on COM, then they are actually marshaled differently. A struct is different from a raw a struct wrapping a primitive type is different from the raw primitive itself. And any calling convention could differ, so it's not actually safe to use struct wrappers. Even though most calling conventions do treat them the same.
fair enough. But yeah, I think that the real answer is values exposed as the uint here, or which we can bike shed on if we wanted. But yeah, I think that the enum type can just be removed.
Yeah, and if they really, really want it, they can use it internally.
So, but then even if we remove the enum, like you said, it's used for interrupt code. So I'm still like, why do we need a public type for this? That's my question still. Like, it's not that I dispute anything that was said about efficiency of the color type, but I mean, we already have this problem today that we have like too many definitions of like, rect and point, and then now it seems like we're doing the same thing for color, and I'm just worrying like where this leads. So that's why I'm asking like who's using it and why.
I think in particular for system.drawing, this is significantly more beneficial than the existing color type. And when you just want to work with a color and not color, not all of the other things like the name, the unused upper 32 bits because they store a long rather than a uint in the actual color type.
No, I get that,
known
but I'm
for-
saying like who is that party? Because I mean like within .NET, I mean if you look at web or WinForms or WPF, none of these three would use color ARGB, right? So my question is, if we add this type, who's actually using that type?
They could expose overloads, and maybe that's a question for Jeremy, but they could expose overloads that take the raw color for efficiency, and avoid carrying around, the non-blittable data and all of the extra size information that makes it inefficient. But that's a question for Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean until I see some actual scenarios, because that to me is also that now we're again adding a ton of overloads for the drawing stack where the overhead is already so high that I really have a hard time buying the color ARGB. Within WinForms buys you anything, right? If anything, you can say, if I'm not using WinForms, I don't want to use system.drawing.color, I want to use color ARGB. So you have an exchange type effectively with, let's say, third-party drawing libraries or something. But then the question is, are they going to use this type? Because presumably they already have their own type definitions. And now we're again back to this thing where we have a type that is useful, but like not really the exchange type, because we're kind of 20 years too late for introducing an exchange type for this.
Right. If we were to expose an actual exchange type, then there's basically two things. One is a 4-byte color struct, which and the other one is a 4 float color struct. The latter one would likely be in system numerics next to the other graphics types, and then the other color struct you'd likely want it to be RGBA, not ARGB, just because that's the standard for graphics as well.
Yeah. Levi, you want to say something?
So right now, the color struct as it currently exists, allows you to pass an arbitrary known color, one that's not part of the enum, or an arbitrary name, and that data is persisted inside of the color struct. If you were to remove this capability and say that a color cannot represent an arbitrary known color and cannot represent an arbitrary name, if you pass in something that's not known to the system, it has to be ARGB by calling one of the existing ARGB overloads, you can actually repurpose the existing struct to match the behavior that you already want. You don't need to introduce a new type for it.
I think there's back compat concerns with that, though.
You don't, those back compat concerns can be addressed. Every concern that I've seen regards serialization, and that can be addressed because there are extensibility hooks.
Well, I think it's perf because there's things around system color and named color specifically. So is system color and is named color are properties exposed publicly on the color type, and
Right.
We already hit some performance issues when we added Rebecca Purple last release because it changed the order of the enum and it ended up causing a regression in a few scenarios. So it is actually used today in scenarios that matter.
And you don't think that that can be switched to be like a lookup table or something else that would give you acceptable performance?
The best you could do is a dictionary here, just because the actual colors they range across the entire 16 million, not including the alpha component
Yes.
range. So we'd have to use a dictionary, and maybe that's acceptable, but considering that an additional branch for Rebecca Purple showed up, I doubt that's the case, because right now it's just a
because you don't need a dictionary per se. If you look at what ASP.NET's done for their backing types, they actually have a source generator that creates a jump table within the code, and their jump table is based on like the low 6 bits of some value or something like that. It's very highly optimized for the scenario they care about.
Yeah, but
I'm just saying it is an option. If we don't want to introduce a new type, we can repurpose this if we're willing to take a behavioral
well,
change.
but yeah, I mean the you'd have to give up completely on there's a constructor that takes a name that you can attach to your color instance, and like that would go nowhere, right?
Well,
it
that's
would
internal
match
today.
it would match an existing name. So there is a way to call that today publicly, like there is a public entry point. What you would say is the current behavior is if it matches a known color name, it just maps to that color. If it does not match a known color name, then that string gets inserted into the struct itself. What we would have to say is that behavior goes away, and that's an exceptional code path.
But I think part of the problem is that some colors are virtual colors, right? They're not like, well-known colors. They're more like, whatever the system thinks a drop shadow should be, right? So like, I guess the idea is once you change your global settings, all your existing color instances still point to the virtualized name. So when you ask them next time for the color, you get the correct color, right? You don't have to reinstantiate them all and do the lookup again, right? And you would probably break that by removing the name.
Yeah, this would be if you were, not that I know that anybody's doing it, but if you made a dictionary of, you named your paintbrushes, right? So background, and you made a color that happened to be red, and you called it background, and now you're looking it up in a dictionary where you're saying go find the thing where the name is the name that I gave it. Like, that is a reasonable scenario that would get broken with that kind of change.
Yeah. Okay. So if we expect that people are passing arbitrary strings here, then what I just mentioned won't work at all. Yeah.
I mean, my other question here is like, so again, like I'm skeptical that this type will pay for itself in terms of usage, but let's pretend for a second that it does. Then what I don't like about the type is that it depends on drawing color, right? So that means it lives higher than drawing does today, because it basically has a known color constructor. It has a conversion from into color. That seems wrong. Like if you really want to make it a lean, lightweight color representation, I would want that type to live lower than system drawing, and then add those APIs to the color one to say, you can say 2 color ARGB on a color instance and it does that or something. But I would not, like, it seems backwards to me to use this new lightweight thing and have that depend on color. It seems the wrong way around. So I guess I think these are the two concerns: like who is the user of the type, and then if we really think there is value, then I think I would want this thing to be lower than color, because it seems like a lightweight thing, right? It just has, basically 4 bytes. The only downside of doing it lower than color is like, where will we put it? If we think it literally doesn't do much, it could be similar to like one of our vector types where it just holds data. But as soon as we add more and more methods to this thing, I mean, hue, saturation, and brightness are fine because they're relatively simple formulae. But as soon as you add more and more, complicated stuff that is really relevant for drawing, at some point we might exceed what we can put here, right? So that's my other concern, is that we don't really have a home for this thing in the middle today. But there really isn't something to be said for we can't introduce it. But I don't know, like if we add something like this, I really want to make sure that this thing carries weight. And for example, Maui can use it, and Xamarin is happy with that too, so that we don't introduce yet another color type that people complain about.
Right, and you're always going to have opinions on what's the correct thing, and in this particular case, this is only the right thing for system.drawing, really, and maybe some edge case scenarios.
Isn't the web using ARGB as well? I mean, in CSS, I'm using ARGB all the time, but I mean, maybe they support everything.
Right, it depends. A lot of times when you're talking about like the hex representation, it's represented as ARGB. But when you're talking about like the Windows native display format is typically BGRA, and GPUs typically operate with RGBA instead. And if you look at like the Vulkan list of VK format and DirectX both have this enum that's like 130 plus different formats, and there's this website that shows like ranging across Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android, what supports what, and the common format between most of those ends up being RGBA instead, and sometimes BGRA as a close follow-up. It's typically not ARGB.
Yeah, it looks like PNGs use ABGR. So yet another one.
So the correct layout of the format varies greatly between systems. And when you're talking about things like hue, saturation, and brightness, you fundamentally have to work with floats. And when you're working with floats, you most frequently want to vectorize it to make it fast, in which case that's why you have a 4-float 128-bit vector instead. And you'll typically load and store that as 4 bytes for efficiency and for increasing memory throughput, but you actually immediately widen that and operate on it as 4 floats for CPU throughput reasons.
Right. Yeah,
and
so
this is also why with the other proposals of like let's expose more color types with .NET. We've always had like James from ImageSharp and Rick Brewster from Paint.net come in and be like, this is a complicated space, and me putting it down as maybe we could expose some helper methods on vector of 4 to make certain algorithms better, but we really don't want to get into the business of like exposing all of WIC, which is what you really need to work with imaging and color spaces.
Yeah, it seems to me like, I don't know, like unless there's more evidence, I don't think it's worth it. Like we already have a container. The container may not be efficient, I get that, but if you want to do interop, you define your own type, because interop is generally not a public thing. And yeah, I mean, yeah. That would be my answer to this for now. I don't know how other people feel, but like I have heard no claim that makes me say yes, let's add this type.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like it's a bifurcation without a scenario.
Yeah, the PM way to say that is like a solution in search of a problem.
For reference, I just linked the Vulkan GPU info page, which lists the format supported and the percentages that different devices support it. and it's very interesting to see like what platforms support what. And that like on certain platforms, there's nothing that supports a format 100% of the time.
Yeah. I mean, if Jeremy has particular things where he needs a public type in WinForms, I'd be more okay with that. But because at that point we have a concrete scenario, and then we can design the type as a, more efficient low-level thing within WinForms. In which case, I think that's fine. But then we probably should also design the type differently. But if you think of this as a, efficient, blittable, low-level exchange type, then the proposal as outlined here would be, again, depending on system drawing color, which seems unfortunate.
All right. In API review, we feel that this is just setting us up for API bifurcation between color and color ARGB, and that there doesn't seem to be a compelling scenario for that bifurcation. With a compelling scenario, we could have a different discussion.
Yeah.
All right.
Seems a bit harsh, but I mean, the video is there so people can see us react, so I think it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we're missing is why, other than perf. And,
yeah.
And we don't.
Yep.
We don't know that there's a super, like, that this is a, measurable with a wall clock level of perf improvement. So.
Yeah, I'll ping Jeremy after this meeting to make sure that he's not completely upset when he sees the email. All right, unflushed bytes.
48913. Who does pipes? Because I don't think Valor's here.
David,
Stefan's here, right?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Sorry, wasn't exactly ready, but this is very useful. No, this is a super good API, so I don't want to let it pass. So basically, there are a lot of cases when you're using a pipe, mostly for diagnostics and things like that, where you're interested basically how large the internal buffer is. So pipes, when you're using the default pipes at least, have an internal buffer. So when you call flush async or write async, it doesn't always return an incomplete task, even though it's not read yet. And this is for efficiency of data transfers. And there are times when you want to estimate, say, the amount of memory used by these pipe buffers in your application. You might want to log this. Pipe writer is abstract, right? So you can wrap streams and stuff with it. And in that case, unflushed bytes doesn't really make sense because they the stream back pipe writer flushes immediately to the stream, and it doesn't have visibility into whatever internal buffers the stream might have. So that's why it's nullable. So if it's null, you just don't have the information. So it's not something that anyone who has a pipe writer could rely on always being non-null, unless of course you nude up the pipe yourself and you know what you got. So with the default pipe writer, this would always have some value. And yeah, that's basically it. I can answer questions, of course.
So I guess my initial concern here is if we have a property that's nullable, it seems like the typical calling pattern would be if writer.unflushedbytes has value and writer.unflushedbytes.value is greater than blah, 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 then perform some action, which means that you're now calling the virtual property twice. I wonder if it would be better to make this a try get unflushed byte count and then out the parameter.
You know that you can condense that expression to just if pipe writer unflushed bytes greater than a number.
I know that, but I don't think I don't think our audience by and large understands that pattern.
You don't think the 6 people who use pipes know that?
Okay.
Hey, it's not that unpopular. We get emails all the time. Oh yeah, sorry. I like I said, I wasn't completely prepared. There is a scenario where you could try to use this, if you knew you had a default pipe, to call flush less often. Basically, you could do some threshold-based writing, which is kind of interesting. because right now, like the reader doesn't wake up until you call flush. So if you just call like, get memory advance, like the reader never sees this, which is good, especially in some cases where you're trying to like efficiently move large amounts of data. Like you just want the consumer side to get a lot of data at once. So this enables that scenario with pipelines pretty simply. As far as the try method, like try get unflushed bytes, I kind of agree. What was it, Jeremy? You were saying that like I don't think nullables are that unusable in like if conditions, but that's just my opinion.
I'd rather it be try get unflushed bytes myself, but aside from that, does pipewriter not allow you to like set the buffer size so you can appropriately flush at the right intervals automatically?
So you can ask like get memory for large buffers. If you're using something like Kestrel, it's kind of advisable that you don't, because you end up using like the array pool instead of like our built-in slab memory pool and stuff, and it might be less efficient. And even then, yeah, but you're right. Like if you know that you just want to write data in really big chunks, you can just delay your call to flush. You can call like get memory advance, get memory advance, get memory advance flush. A lot of things do that. But it's more if you want to like flush dynamically based on what the consumer is doing. Really, it was interesting for me to see that usage example. I think it's super interesting just for the diagnostics as well.
So you're saying like, for example, by default, you might want to say there's a 4 kilobyte buffer, and to have pipewriter automatically flush when the 4 kilobyte buffer fills. But then in certain scenarios, you might want to flush more frequently, and so you might want to flush every like 512 bytes instead. And this would enable you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this just gives you information you didn't have before. Like people are always curious about like this data, and you can make decisions just like what you said, where if you have like, different places in your code base that are like writing to the pipewriter, this can be a convenient way to kind of see if you're like near your unflushed threshold or something. Yeah.
What would you do then if you were near the flush threshold?
So I mean, this is where you get to like, are you gonna like edge trigger and like, you could definitely do some stuff like negling using this kind of data, but I mean that's kind of left up to the implementer. Like, would you flush, after a 1 second timeout if you never hit the threshold? Like, these are things you would have to consider, but that's harder to do if you don't have this data.
Well,
you could just assume that, like, you could just track it yourself. I mean, to a certain extent, and you assume if you haven't flushed, it hasn't been read. But
yeah, I'm asking because I'm more familiar with how this is used with Stream than how it's used with Pipe. So tell me if I'm getting this wrong. But I assume the common pattern here is I just do write. I don't ever need to call flush until I get to a point where I'm like, okay, now I want to make sure that all the bytes I've written are actually sent to the peer. And if in the meantime, if I've written a whole lot of stuff, then the pipe writer has a reasonable strategy for how to flush that out on the wire one way, if it hits some threshold. It's not simply going to buffer all that data, right?
So with pipewriter, if you don't call flush or write async, the reader will not see the data. So
ever?
That's just how it works. Yeah, you gotta flush.
But that's not true for some pipes, right? I mean, you just said that for Stream it's writing through.
Not until you call flush or write async. I'll double check the Stream pipe writer.
It's been a while since I've used pipe writer and pipe reader, so I'm
Yeah, but if you're just calling get memory in advance, like we're just like Stream pipe writer will just allocate buffers from a memory pool and wait till you flush.
I mean,
And like link them together.
so the concern I have here is that you've made this the user's problem, right? You basically said, look, you got to flush at some point. Figure it out. Good luck. Seems like in general it's better to, where the pipe reader can make reasonable choices for the user here, and it seems like it would be better to not require the user to have to. I don't know. Maybe that's not how it works today. So maybe that's a moot point. But
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that would probably be better feedback for the initial pipe API review about like the flushing semantics. But yeah, if you don't call flush async or write async, like the way pipe writers work, all of them, as far as I'm aware, is get memory advance just buffers data.
But there is a model.
I mean, there's no way to apply back pressure at that point anyway, and like the contract is we don't show it to the reader until then.
But so how does back pressure work? Back pressure flush async won't complete until appropriate, until
right until you. So if you're already blocking, it won't complete until you fall under the configured resume writer threshold, and if you are basically buffering at the moment, it will start blocking once you, or start returning incomplete tasks once you hit the pause writer threshold, which is higher, right? Like we're trying to avoid thrashing. So I think the defaults for the pause writer threshold is 64 kilobytes, and the resume writer threshold is like 32 kilobytes for the default pipe writer, right? So those thresholds aren't relevant for like the stream pipe writer. That it just flushes the stream when you flush it right.
Right. So well the yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
I mean, I'm not sure I missed that, but like, why is this value nullable? Like, wouldn't 0 be effectively communicating nothing is to flush? So normal code that just checks for the value being greater than 0 would be sufficient.
Yeah, like this line in the sample is redundant. You would just call flush. Either there's nothing to flush and it does nothing, or there's something to flush and you flushed it. This code in the middle is more interesting, but
it would be misleading to return 0 because that could indicate that there is literally no data that remains to be flushed, and if calling flush is necessary for the correct behavior of the pipe, it could lead to misuse.
oh, were you just
Sorry,
asking
can you repeat that?
the null versus 0 email?
Yeah, so I believe what was said earlier is some pipes require flush to be called in order to work correctly. And if we make this property return 0 by default, that would indicate there's no data to be flushed, therefore you don't have to call flush, which means that callers who then query that property and see a 0 value returned would bypass the mechanism that actually that actually publishes the data.
I agree completely. Yeah. So if you get null, you're just gonna want to flush. Like, if you were planning on using this to like flush more efficiently, like you're just gonna like want to flush every time because you don't know.
Well, but you're not necessarily, right? Because you may be able to estimate yourself better how much unflushed data there is, right? Like just looking at your example.
Right, and there's an existing code that does that for sure. So like, yes, like if you don't want to use this, you don't have to.
No, but my point is, so the situation now is we'll expose this, but you can't rely on the data being there. Some pipe writers will return the correct info, some will return null. That means if I'm writing code generically against an arbitrary pipe writer and I don't know whether it supports this or not, I'm going to have my own strategy of some form, in order to get reasonable flushing behavior with all pipes. I'm going to have to say, like, track my own flush threshold and flush when I think it's appropriate, as opposed to relying on the pipe writer to track it for me. Which in most cases I can probably do reasonably well, but I can understand how there's some I may not be able to do that well in.
Exactly. So I think, this not having this API doesn't make like pipe writers unusable or anything. And you can have reasonable flushing behavior without this. That's why when I first presented this, I was talking more about the diagnostic aspect. And then I scrolled down to David's usage examples. And I'm like, yeah, we did talk about that. But yeah, for me, like, yeah, it can be useful for like the smarter flushing. I really want it for the visibility. It's not critical for PipeWriter, but I think it's nice to have, reasonably easy to implement. Yeah, so that's my stance on it. This is something we've talked about like since we first introduced pipelines, like system IO pipelines.
So let me
and it's
just
something that's
so
like,
to
we
be
don't
clear,
need it, but it keeps coming up.
yeah. So like, is the idea it's nullable because there's derivatives that won't give you the data, and so there are effectively unflushed bytes, but the API has no way to determine that, so it has to return null. Is that the idea?
And there is also that there just are existing implementations out there, right, that aren't going to implement this, and we can't say it's zero because I mean we don't know how much the existing implementation is buffering. Like, because for example, even the streamback one, going back to that, could probably implement this now that we've been talking about this more, right? Because until you call flush, it does have like that internal linked list of buffer segments, so there are unflushed bytes. But yeah, older implementations just don't implement this. We can't give it like a default implementation of 0 because that would be misleading.
We could
therefore,
return
nullable.
-1, although we typically don't do that.
Yeah, that just sets up
I mean,
for a
if
lot of
you
people
really
not
want to-
checking it.
I mean, the downside with making it nullable is that normal checks won't work. Right? If you say x larger than 0 or something, those checks will, I think, no longer compile because
No, that's what.
the
So
value
always
might be
false.
null.
The comparison with the nullable with the non-nullable is always false.
yeah,
But I mean, not everyone knows that, but yeah.
the code as written in the example will compile, and
Really?
yeah, because as Stefan said, it's if unflushed bytes is null, it returns false for all Boolean operators, except for equal null.
Yep.
I see.
I feel
That's
like it's even
unfortunate
false
then,
for
yeah,
not
yeah.
equals a literal because it's like I can't answer this question. So
I really like the pattern of if writer dot try get unflushed bytes and result is greater than flush threshold though.
Yeah,
'Cause you
at that
just,
point I
like,
agree
out it.
because, yeah. Like, if you really want the caller to think about it and, like, basically say, like, look, like, you might get I may not be able to tell you whether there's unflushed bytes, right? So don't rely on this value being accurate. Then the try pattern makes more sense to me than saying, oh, we return a magic sentinel because, yeah, if I read code like what's on the screen right now, like if writer unflushed bytes larger than 0, that returns false. But the answer was really like, sorry, I don't know how many. Then that's a bit. I can see that resulting in correctness bugs where your code reads completely reasonable and you completely missed the fact that unflushed bytes might have been null actually.
Right.
Versus with try, it's pretty obvious it returned false and told you like I don't know.
Right, because with the code right now, someone reading that in API review might assume that the else case means that there were no unflushed bytes, when it could be that there are unflushed bytes and they're just not available. Whereas the try pattern makes it very clear that this path means a count of unflushed bytes was available and it was greater than the flush threshold.
Yeah, I can get behind it. Like, you guys are right. Like, I'm saying it's easy, but the nullable comparison thing is super tricky. I think it's kind of easy-ish once you know it, but yeah, I think a lot of people get it wrong.
Well, the problem is not so much whether it's easy or not, right? The problem is more that, if I'm not in an IDE, or even if I am in an IDE, but I don't know what the types are, it's not clear that there is a comparison with null implicitly, right? And I think that's a good point. Like in normal cases when you just have a Boolean, you can't just say if x dot blah, because then it's a nullable Boolean, and since C# forces you to do double equals true or double equals false, right? Because there's no implicit conversion from a nullable bool to a Boolean. And so I think that for the most part, like it will force people to be correct. But in this case, given that a normal comparison you would write against a non-nullable, just works but returns false, yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
because that means
to your
that
point, yeah,
code that
like-
looks correct just isn't.
right. Like a year from now, even me might see this in code review and just forget it's nullable and be like, oh, that looks fine.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think I'm sold on the try method version of this.
And without var, it's not. that
David will probably
unusable.
hate me for accepting that, but it's okay.
That's fine. He's wrong. No, I think try was really shitty before we had out var. Now with, but you can literally create variables on the fly. It's actually pretty nice. No idea what happens in VB or F# though.
So F# actually implicitly recognizes and converts the tryout pattern to effectively be a tuple, which is bool result, and then you can do the unit type checking and all the standard pattern matching on it. So they work fairly well with the tryout
Really?
pattern. Yep.
That's awesome. I did not know that. Do they change the method name?
No, I
Or is
think
it
they
just you
keep
call
the
it the method and it's
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, it keeps the method name exactly as is. It just effectively fixes up the type to be more like F# behind the
I
scenes.
see. So it basically strips the out parameter and puts them in the return position as a tuple.
Yeah, kind of. It's something like that.
Interesting. That's actually a neat feature.
All right, so now that it's a method, does anyone looking at the method feel like get unflushed bytes is returning a span or memory instead of an integer?
It should be byte count, yeah. I was waiting for an appropriate time to bring that up. Thank you for providing that opportunity.
Me too.
I mean, that seems reasonable.
I think David's freaking out about the. sorry. He's about to join this meeting. You guys are gonna have to go over that again. I didn't mean to side channel.
I'll bring it up in your connect, Stephen. It's all fine. Reality meeting.
How do we add him? Doesn't he have an invite?
He
I
should
thought
have
he
one.
did.
He might have declined it. But you can just literally add him and then it will just call him. I think anybody should be able to add someone to a meeting. I don't
If
think you have to
anyone
be
can
the.
help.
Yeah, I
If
can
anyone
do it.
can
I mean,
assist. Yeah, thank you.
Oh my gosh, I heard we are doing something terrible and awful. Can we not do a try? I would prefer a can.
We approved your API. Congratulations.
I don't want an API. I would prefer a can. You can take that back.
Well, we could
Can we do
always
a can
mark
instead?
this as rejected if you want.
That's actually I would prefer that. Can we do a
I'm curious,
So,
why,
okay.
David, why do you want two virtuals rather than one?
Because the usage is gross.
It
What's
works
gross about
naturally
it?
with
It is-
F# and with how the rest of .NET APIs work.
What are you talking about? Scroll up. Copy that sample. Just rewrite that sample.
Would someone using this typically check a can and then change the algorithm they use to just have one that always checks unflushed bytes and another one that doesn't use that?
That's the question. Like, how does that change? How does
Because
your
like,
code
you only
change
need to
if
check
it
that it
fails?
supports it once.
Right.
technically.
Exactly.
What do you mean?
But in terms of how this changes, doesn't just that one if line change to a different if line?
Yeah, first of all,
think
you
you-
would have
I
cached
think
the
the
answer here and
can
you wouldn't
goes
have called your
first.
virtual twice.
The can goes first at the beginning of the whole loop, and you never check it again.
But in terms of what your concerns for how this changes, can we rewrite that if line with the
You
try?
mean- You mean
Your
right
concern,
now?
your concern
Sure.
was your concern was the code that someone writes. So I'm curious to see the next to each other. This was your preferred, what's currently on the screen. So I'm wondering what it looks like with the try method and comparing the two.
It looks like the try pattern with what he's got there would literally be if not writer dot try get unflushed bytes outvar unflushed bytes, or unflushed bytes is greater than flush threshold.
Right.
I
So
just put it in chat there. So
it's a few characters different, and it saves a virtual call.
and in F# it works by converting to their option type.
What does it have to do with F#?
We were discussing F# earlier and how tryout is implicitly recognized and supported by them.
That's super. I mean, that's super cool, but this just feels bad.
I'm trying to understand why, David.
I prefer having the can and the property rather than the try. We do it everywhere else.
And so you want us to throw if the can is false?
Yes.
That sounds expensive and like it couldn't.
How is that
easily be
expensive?
virtualized and inlined.
I'm also I don't quite understand the.
It's like
The
stream. It's
can.
like can see, can read, can
But
write. Like,
those are
it's the same idea.
can side effect or can complicated thing, not can return a value.
No.
Can return a value
Like-
is just try to get the value.
You can't check the length of a stream unless you check is it can seek or can something? Same idea, right?
Fair enough.
Because
How
streams
is
the
this
API we
different?
want to copy.
But
How is this different?
really, can seek is telling you whether seek will work, and then length was only added to support seek. So
Probably.
that's a
But
side
that
effect
pattern
of there was
is
already a can for it.
Sure.
That's why it's
If
called
we add
can
anything
seek,
to
not
stream-
can length.
Well, I think people use can seek to check the length as well, because it happens to be there. We could have a can check length.
Do you? I feel that
We could.
I
We
feel that
could.
I just call length and hope that I don't get a stream that doesn't support it.
I don't think so, because like the streams in ASP.NET don't support it, so you
I-
can't use
I-
length at all.
I also thought that length wasn't based on can seek, and that was a problem we discussed in another review where there was a there was a proposal for has length specifically for the case where you can read the length, where you have a length but you can't seek.
That sounds
those
good.
exist as
We should
well.
add that, and we should add has unflushed bytes.
Well, the problem with has unflushed bytes is has unflushed bytes sounds like it's answering the question for you
I know.
of do I need to call flush?
Can
Yes,
has,
and the other thing is,
can
like,
has.
forward thinking a little, like we might have other stuff like this, right? Like I could see us also adding like unconsumed bytes at some point. Like I don't want to like digress into other APIs, but I don't want it to be like stream either, where we have like how many can properties
I prefer that to the tries.
or has.
I don't think API review is going to agree with you there, David, just because that's not how most of .NET works.
And can we reject the API and come back again?
If you want to
think
withdraw
there's
it, I think
other
you're allowed to do
people
that.
are interested in this.
David, can I
So
just
I'm-
ask I just want to understand the concern with the try. Is the concern with the try that the tryness is a property of the type's implementation rather than the current state of things? Like for a given typewriter implementation, it will always succeed or always fail, versus
Right.
at that moment in time, it might succeed or might fail. Is that the concern?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I would also
we
add
have-
another complication in that if you require this functionality for your code to work, it will fail possibly kind of later than ideal. It would have been nice to throw in a constructor that took a pipewriter that didn't support this.
The fork up front, exactly. See, I think you would want to like the tricky thing about making it nullable that was strange is that you kind of have to have this weird branch in the code that felt wrong, but maybe it makes sense to branch super early. Like,
Right, so
can
for
I
that-
even read the length? Go
So
somewhere
that's not specifically a concern with the try. That's even the existing proposal that was long question mark that was nullable has the exact same issue. Right
Correct.
there.
I figured we would land on can because stream does the cans. So I was hoping for, at least.
So to be clear, like we have used the try pattern for polymorphic types to add features over time. So like I mean, we already have try implementations that will either always return true or always succeed, right? So that's the general thing we have done. Because otherwise
What-
you end up in a world
can
where
you-
you
can you-
always add things in pairs, right?
Can you remind me, Emo? Because like for channels, when was it done at 5, we added count. We also added the can count.
So we
Exactly.
have done the can pattern in cases where we already had can methods on the type, but I don't recall the actual instance. But I would have to dig it. But like I'm pretty sure we have done that. Maybe Jeremy remembers, but
The only one
We
I
have-
can think of is
So
try to
if
get
we do,
count from enumerable. Try get enumerated count, but that's an extension, right?
right, but that's logically the same thing, right? It either always succeeds or it doesn't, right? It's not a state thing. It's in the what instance are you invoking on kind of thing.
okay, so I
Oh.
didn't want to derail on
Too late.
other proposed APIs, yeah, but I'm totally going to. So given that we like the can the can properties for being checkable once, and then you can like have perhaps like 2 different write loops depending on like what the pipe writer supports or something, which is cool. Do we want to consider like other properties we might want to add that would be guarded by the can flag? For example, that I mentioned earlier, like unconsumed bytes. So this would be bytes that you flushed that just haven't been read yet, which I think is useful for diagnostics. I think if you probably did one, you do the other. And I don't want like there to be too many can properties.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the one argument I do buy is if you want to do checking up front, you want to design the property such that if you're really sure you only need it for one particular property, it's fine. But if you have something that is a bit more abstract as a concept, you may want to do that, and then you can add other properties in the future and guard them behind the same if check, right? Otherwise, you will end up in a world where you literally have can XXX, can YYY, and then can ZZZ, and then
Wait,
it just becomes
don't
a
we-
mess.
don't we have this in general for anything that we have this abstract based class? Don't we have this problem?
Yes,
What do you mean
we're
by
trying to
this
mitigate
problem?
this problem.
I mean, we generally
The-
try
the-
to avoid.
sorry, the
like,
pattern-
explosion.
The pattern as like you have to add a can for a new behavior that cannot be implemented with a virtual, right?
But we could do multiple at once, is all I'm saying, right? And then you limit the
Yes.
can properties. Like if can is
I
like
don't think we should add unconsumed bytes because that doesn't apply to all pipe writers.
yeah, I get what you're saying. And with even the stream pipe writer, it can do unflushed bytes. And
Right.
That's true.
Because it buffers
Okay,
by default.
maybe they should be different properties. But I also think like unconsumed bytes on stream back pipe writer, like that could actually just return 0, like or literally unflushed bytes, because the consumer in this case is the stream you're writing to.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Emo, looking at the public refs from Master a couple weeks ago, I don't see anything that looks like it would be a try that is a some derived types will be returning true and some will be returning false.
Right, like I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying there's
All the ones that I'm saying are things like dictionary, try, get value, where it's based on an argument in an object state, not just an inheritance chain.
Oh. Yeah, I mean it's possible that I misremember, but like I can dig it out. I mean the try get count for enumerable would be basically the same thing, right? I mean,
Right.
not that we approved it yet, but I think the proposal was there. And I don't think we would have said no to that purely because it's a
Right.
function of the argument.
That's fair.
So can count is literally the moral equivalent of what this is, but on channels.
And I think we could do that, but we should add unconsumed bytes though.
No, we shouldn't.
Yeah, I didn't want to have this.
So
debate
don't
right
get me
now.
wrong. I think the argument you are making, David, of like I want to check early, makes sense to me that you want to go with a can XXX and then XXX pattern. That seems reasonable. And I think given if we only have one thing today that we need, I think it's fine to say we just start with this one thing. The only concern that I do have is that you add more and more of these advanced properties, and then you end
Right.
up with like more and more of the can ones too, right?
Soup. Yep.
And that's the downside. But it's probably also not the end of the world, right? Like, I mean, it's an advanced API already, so it's reasonable.
And
I
so
mean,
far we've added things that have mostly been virtual. This is the first one that can't be done that way. Like we added
You
cup
mean
to
that
it,
have
saying we
reasonable
added
default implementations and don't
Yeah.
just like go
It
off
can be
their
yeah.
history? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
This is the first one.
I agree. I mean, so one thing is like I think Typewriter is a pretty small API right now. So
Right.
I mean, I really don't want to be in the situation where you have like a ton of canned properties. I feel like I want to talk to you outside of API review about this unconsumed bytes before we just say we don't want it. Because I do think that it can be guarded by the same flag.
Well, it's super useful. It's just it'll all
Would
be
an
false in
unconsumed
string.
bytes be part of the reader, not the writer?
Exactly, and that's see the thing is
Not necessarily.
the pipe itself works fine because the pipe has both on the same object. But when you're wrapping a stream, it doesn't make any sense. That's the issue.
So if we're gonna have it does make sense. So if we're gonna have the debate, unconsumed bytes for a stream pipe writer would just be unflushed bytes because those are what's
It could
not
be, yeah.
consumed by the underlying stream. No, that's just what it would be. And then for the default pipe writer, it would be like what hasn't been actually consumed from the pipe reader. So if it's examined or whatever. And then the third one, right, would be unexamined bytes. That one would make no sense for the stream one.
How do you use
again, like,
unconsumed
it
bytes?
wouldn't be wrong to just be unflushed bytes. Like they could all just be unflushed bytes, right? Equal to unflushed bytes for the stream one. But these are all like interesting diagnostic pieces of data.
Right. Well, the trouble
that
with
people have asked for.
the trouble with adding multiple things under the same can flag, right? Let's say we call it can count, right?
Yep.
And you add the three things you've mentioned now, and in 2 releases you come up with another thing that is another count. Well, that looks like it should be guarded by this super generic sounding can count, but it's not. And so now you have
Yeah, but
this
those
weird
are the
like
3 things.
can
if I'm
count
being honest.
and can
Like,
count this other thing, and it's like, well, but I checked can count and it returned true.
There's nothing else to count. Like it's literally unflushed bytes, unconsumed bytes, unexamined.
There's
bytes.
how much
I think
space
in
before you have to
many
reallocate. There's how
like,
much like
I think Stefan has a point. I don't think we should do it in this API review. I think we should have a different proposal for those additions and see if they make sense in all cases. And if they do, then we can come back and rename all the bools. But I don't think they should be guarded by the same bool anyway, because I think they're consumed differently. Like in this case, there's a very specific use case where this is very commonly used, and it isn't for diagnostics. It's for for actual functionality.
Well, and to the other point that was made in the API review is if you're, but before you got here, David, is if you're the only one writing to the pipe writer, like you know what you did or didn't flush. Like
That's
it's
why
not
the
a
code
strictly
does that
necessary.
today. The code actually shows the
Yeah.
sample, right? It's about convenience, not about required.
Exactly. No, and that's what I said when we were proposing it. But I'm just pointing that out. So
Yep.
I'm fine with accepting this with the can flag for just this property, with the idea that we'll submit another proposal, because I didn't want to derail this. It's as soon as we added the can flag that it got me thinking, like, I don't want 3 can flags.
I want 12. Can. Yeah, point taken.
all right. So then for this one, we basically said we go with can and get.
A nullable long. Yep.
And that itself is going to check the flag and throw.
Maybe.
So double checking the flag
Maybe.
every time.
Could do it at
well,
once.
I don't.
Why would it
Yeah,
check
that's
the
what the
flag?
pry pattern is.
But I
Doesn't
think
have to,
that
just
you can
throw it.
avoid the like if you've overridden it, you're not going to check the thing, and the default is just
Yeah, we
throw.
Right, just the base
Yeah.
implementation is gonna throw.
Exactly.
Unconditionally throw.
Because it would
so
either
there should be no double.
it would either
checking, yeah.
throw a different exception if can was true, of hey you implemented this wrong, or it would just throw not supported exception. So, all right. So what's the can?
Can get unflushed bytes count or whatever.
I like count.
Yeah. Like, so I like can count long term once it guards all the things. But for now, I kind of see why you want to put unflushed bytes in there.
Can we just call it can get unflushed bytes and unflushed bytes as a property?
Yeah.
Generally, we say that property getters shouldn't throw, but I mean, this type is weird.
I think it's better as a method.
What, what are you talking? No, hold on. Length in
Stream has stuff that
absolutely
throws.
It should be a property, not
It's
a.
considered,
not
and
a-
that's considered a misdesign.
I want to copy the myth design. I like it. Like, I don't want a get length. It's super weird. Don't make the code ugly. The code's gonna be pretty. Like, public virtual long length, and then have the thing be can get length or can count on flush bytes.
So, David, if a pipewriter has some sort of auto flushing, let's say you fill up a sun buffer,
Yep.
is this going to return sort of a
Zero all
pseudo,
the time?
like you didn't call flush, or is it just going to return 0 because it auto flushed?
If it
I don't
can
know if
only
one of those
auto flush
exists.
if you use right. If you use get memory advanced, it can't really auto flush.
That's the problem.
doing
There's no
crazy
ASIC way to
stuff.
apply back pressure. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, so a custom pipe writer like blocking on get memory or something, like I haven't seen it.
Well, I just
Maybe-
mean you could have, say, advance notice that its buffer was full, so it decides to throw it in a queue for the socket to send, something like that, right?
That's evil. It's evil.
Yeah, but if you're
Doable, but
doing
evil.
that, then you're allowing people to write without back pressure, which is I guess you could do. But it's not something I've seen. It's not. I would say that breaks the contract. Like you should only flush with the call to flush async or write async.
I agree. I do have a question though. Like super sketchy. What if we called it length? No, I mean we shouldn't. We shouldn't. But what if we called it length?
Wouldn't length be like the total number of bytes you've written
Yeah.
in all time?
Maybe
Yep,
you're
that
right.
would be
For forever
unconsumed
bytes. Forever bytes. Not unconsumed. Like ever written.
Length would be unconsumed bytes, if anything. That's all I'm saying.
Would it? You think?
Oh yes, yes.
What
I would have to.
does it
I
make
think
sense to come with this API? Like, does it actually? Would the code samples used in this in this issue description actually benefit from that?
From a
From
no,
unconsumed bytes, no, that's more of a diagnostic thing.
Okay.
no,
But that
yeah,
would
exactly.
be length. Like,
Okay.
that's
This is fine then.
that's the length of the linked list, right? Like that's the length of the bytes in the, read-only sequence of bytes that's still being like
Yeah,
managed
but
by the pipe, not returned to the pool.
but that definitely shouldn't be a property because its value gets decremented asynchronously by some other instance. Like it really should
diagnostic only.
convey I am a single point in time value, which I think depending on if pipe writers are supposed to support multiple callers during write, then this should really be a method to indicate like this is a very point in time answer. Some other caller may be influencing it, but if it's expected single writer, then as a property, it's just the state that you're in for your single call. So
So like volatile
Single writer.
properties for like diagnostic info are like off limits.
You said volatile. What?
I mean, like it's
I mean, who cares? I mean,
if it's diagnostics, then who cares if it's a property or a method? If it's supposed to look convenient
Yeah.
in calling code for obvious pattern, then it should have a
Right.
like, does it make sense to be a property? And it's reporting the state of some other object doesn't feel like a property.
that's basically what I was getting at. I'm not against it being a method. I was just curious,
I am.
like, why
I'm
it shouldn't be a
super
property.
against it being a method. Shouldn't be property.
No, I'm talking. Okay.
The other lengthy
We're not
thing.
talking about unflushed bytes at
Yeah.
the moment.
Yeah.
We're talking about the thing that on a background thread could be updated because the pipe reader is running who knows where, right? But
That's
anyway,
that's made up.
The unconsumed
The crazy thing.
the number Stefan wants
So
in his
that's why
log.
you should-
Um,
yeah, exactly.
get number Stefan wants in his log should be the name of the method. All right. Does
I mean, the one thing I would say is like we should make. I mean, the can pattern really makes sure that the methods are tied together. To me, it seems very weird if the can thing has a count on it and the other thing doesn't. Like if we really want to make it a property, then I think at the very minimum it should be can get unflushed bytes.
I'm
Because
okay with
otherwise,
that.
I mean, normally can is guarding an operation, which is why it's normally methods. But
Except
if
for
you
seek,
wanted,
which is weird.
well, I mean, it is. I mean, there's a seek method and there's a position property that mirrors that, right? So
Right.
like you can think of them as the same thing.
Yep,
But we
that
don't
sounds
have a
fine.
count method here. So if we don't have a count unflushed bytes method, we should not have a can count unflushed bytes property.
Yep, agreed.
Fair enough. Or we call it unflushed byte count, and can count unflushed bytes.
I
Well, I mean,
want
they
to ask
should-
about
they should
that.
just match.
I know we don't have what's that feature in F# where you can define units. We don't have anything for bytes in like .NET. Just a,
Humanizer does, but yeah.
just a thing to bring up, like in general, like and we have time span for time. We don't have anything for bytes. It would be
I
interesting
mean,
to.
a bite-sized struct would be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be
Yep.
in favor of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I use it all the time from Humanizer.
Yep.
Even though it's buggy. Yeah, saying something like bite-sized dot from megabytes 4.
Yeah,
instead
exactly
of
that.
saying- Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
did
for
you mean
both,
megabytes or the other one?
MIB.
We can decide how we name those, right? I forgot what the other ones are called.
Funny enough, Claire and I were talking about that just the other day. If you did want to consider something like that, I'm sure she would love to have that conversation with all of you.
All right. So is there anything else we want
Yeah.
to do for this one?
Yeah, you
I'm
want to click
super happy
comment.
now.
Good.
Wait, are we still calling it unflushed bytes and not unflushed byte count?
Whatever you do, just align them.
I think the original criticism of unflushed bytes sounds like it should return a memory or a
Well,
sequence.
yes, especially once it was the try get on a thing that is otherwise returning spans and memories.
I don't
I
feel
feel that count
super strongly.
is
yeah.
slightly helpful, but I don't care a whole lot.
It's a long, like, it's not a bool.
Yeah, I'd still
and
like
even
it to be
so,
byte count.
Like, you can use it to determine if there's stuff that needs to be flushed, kind of like a bool. I think count's redundant. Like, what else would unflushed bytes be?
Yeah, agreed. And do we have any
The
precedent?
actual
for-
bytes.
Yeah,
Do
the
you have
actual
any-
unflushed bytes.
Do we have
I mean,
any
that's why we have type.
precedent for this stuff? I mean, okay.
We
first
don't
of all, we need to add a type.
we don't tend to have a lot of things that return spans and memories, but Pipewriter does. So the precedent
Is it returning?
It sounds like again that it's giving you the unflushed bytes. Granted, you'll find out very
I
quickly
could
that
see
it's
it
not.
if it was a span.
Well,
I mean, I
we
would
have a thing
say-
called get memory and get span.
We do.
So it's called like get span.
But that's
get memory.
not
It's
the
pretty,
unflushed bytes.
it's pretty obvious. No, but it's literally called get span and get memory, like
Right.
specifically.
I know.
I mean, unflushed length.
I mean, I think honestly, like the argument for count being different, I think that's more relevant when you have multiple parameters and they're ambiguous, right? And they have their number of elements versus number of bytes, right? Then it makes sense, right? But in this case, if you assume this is a memory, well, the types don't match, right? So like the code that you would be writing just doesn't compile. So I don't think the confusion is the big problem, because as soon as you write code like if writer.unflushed bytes larger than some threshold, well, it's pretty obvious what this means, right? It can't mean anything but the number of bytes. So like if your code compiles, I think the meaning is pretty much unambiguous.
Right.
And if your code doesn't compile, then well, whatever assumptions you're making, the compiler tells you where you went wrong.
Yes, the only thing that would be weird is if in the future someone decided actually it would be convenient to get the projection back of what are the bytes that actually haven't been flushed, and then you have the get unflushed bytes, no totes for real method. But I don't really think that's likely.
That's
so.
fair. Like, yeah, if we think we need to return the unflushed bytes as a memory, then at that point, sitting on that 9 might be unfortunate, but that doesn't seem like something that.
No, we call it
Yeah, I
get
don't
unflushed
see that.
bytes memory.
If we're
That'd be
expecting
weird.
it to always have an if, then I think that's good. Considering the ASP code base uses var all over the place, I would love to see var unflushed bytes equals
Var.
writer.unflushed bytes, and then you're code reviewing it and you're going, what is unflushed bytes?
Var is the truth.
I mean, sure.
I don't hate count, but yeah, I think it's fine as is.
I mean, there's a limit. I mean, we also have bytes written, right? We don't call it byte count written or a number of bytes written, right?
Exactly.
Would we replace
And so-
bytes with count? Like, I don't know.
Unflushed count? I mean,
Like,
count of what?
Get unflush or can count unflushed bytes, unflushed count. Yeah, I don't think you would. Byte count would be the option, right? And it seems a little much.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
think
it's not
honestly
the
at this
worst
point,
thing.
like we're trying to like make the name too correct, and a name that is very correct is usually unwieldy, and I think this gets into unwieldy territory.
Is the casing right? I'm just checking. I wasn't sure
Are
if
you-
my casing was right.
Capital F. Is that
Yeah,
what
is
you're
it?
wondering
Is
about?
it? Is that right? That's
I
right,
think
right?
so.
This is
Oh, I-
where Jeremy just has a single tear rolling down his cheek.
To quote Dan, but then change it to match the situation. Un is not a word, therefore
Right.
you would not capitalize the thing after it.
But pre is
Yeah.
apparently.
No.
It's always hyphenated.
Okay. So. All right.
Thank you guys. I love you.
On continuing our theme of redoing work. Thank you. Undo close tab. Jeremy K, why did you want color argb?
For a couple of reasons. I mean, the main one is that the main issue is that like the color type is not a splittable type. So working with arrays of it is sort of painful. Which we do in some cases, both within system drawing and inside of WinForms. So finding we're redefining this thing multiple places to be able to do interop and also to work with sets of data. So there's that aspect is being able to have something that's well defined to make sure that we're dealing with creating these and getting the bytes out correctly. The other scenario is just that what we intend to do once we have this is to actually start floating some additional APIs for performance reasons around things that take arrays of colors. Stuff working with bitmap stuff and things like that. This is Win32 specific color stuff, which is what system drawing is. So hence why I proposed this to throw this in system drawing. There are, as I linked in here, other issues about trying to create more generic colors. And it seems to be sort of a general consensus that like the way Windows does it is not the way we would do new colors if we were going to do colors. But this is a very Windows specific area here. So it seemed better to create one of these here than to sully up the long-standing request of like creating some more useful and modern color types, right? Which I think would come in numerics.
So let me ask you this then. So is this basically then a type that the only reason you would make it public is because drawing and WinForms are in different assemblies and you need to call across the boundary and want to basically reconcile the types you already have in your implementation? Or is that something that you intend to exchange with people outside?
Well, that's the future is intended to exchange it with folks outside too for more high performant access to things where we need to manipulate a range of colors values rather than having them be ints or an array of int or uint. This makes it easy for people to manipulate it and not have to throw it through a color type.
feel like I would love to see this be a little more not specific to WinForms and just be called color ARGB 8 or something instead of numerics.
The standard would be ARGB 32, not 8.
There was
Plenty of places refer to the component size, Tanner.
Yes, but when they do that, it's A8R8G8B8. When it's at the end, such as Unity, and I can give hundreds of other examples, it's the total size of the struct, and then you divide that by the components. So it would be ARGB 32.
Sometimes, so long as we decide on a standard and make it clear what it means.
Sure. There was significant feedback from the community and the other issues in this one as well, that like we should never expose ARGB, we should only be exposing RGBA, which defeats the purpose of this thing. It's like, well, the underlying thing is ARGB, but I didn't want to fight that fight. But if you think that it's legitimate to have both sets of colors there, then I'm fine with it going there. I was mainly trying to avoid this, like, I guess, corruption of purity of our, ideal color types.
Well, it seems like these are more. This is more of a raw pixel format and not a description of a color.
That's the problem with the color concept in general, is that there's over 130 formats, and you're never going to get something that satisfies them all. In this particular case, it is specifically ARGB 32, which is what GDI and some Windows APIs accept. Other Windows APIs specifically deal with the BGRA 32, because that's what the underlying surface format of the desktop is. But most of those ones are more modern APIs, and not what WinForms would use.
So, and System Drawing itself is built on GDI Plus, which uses ARGB as well, as its color type. Matter of fact, it calls it ARGB.
So the reason we hit closed earlier is it didn't seem like there was a scenario that was compelling enough to start bifurcating all the APIs that take color into color and color ARGB or ARGB 32 or whatever we feel like calling it. So is that something that you would disagree with, or?
Well, I don't think that we would want to be bifurcating those things. I think things that take a single color, it's not worth doing, right? So having this thing be convertible to color, it's not really much of an overhead there when you're trying to like set an individual pixel or whatever else. The scenario where we would be using this publicly would be things where we're taking arrays of things, and then we'd have an overload in those cases if we already had an existing one. And if we don't, brand new APIs, we'd just use this thing. So I don't think it's necessary to go and add it to all the other things, because this will convert automatically.
Well, we can discuss that.
Well, in my current proposal, right?
Yeah.
That was what I was envisioning.
All right. So, Emo, how does that make you feel?
I mean, as I said before, like if this is a type that we kind of envision, like within WinForms to make things more efficient, I think that at least that may have a concrete customer that uses the type, and so we can validate that this design holds water. What I'm concerned about is if we basically say we have this new thing that is more lightweight than color, and like it's lower level or whatever, then it basically has the risk of us just creating a yet another type that basically doesn't get used by anybody, right? And that's kind of the the problem with that proposal. But if we say we limit it to WinForms or drawing in general, I think we probably should think about the shape and the namespace and where the stuff will go, because at that point, to me, it kind of seems like it is kind of a peer to color. It's just a more advanced version of that, but within the same customers that are happy with GDI will just use this one for particular cases. But
and that's why I wanted to throw it here.
Yeah.
because it's very specific to this particular set of scenarios. And I didn't want to answer the how do we define our whole set of colors that we're going to do for numerics.
Right.
Which we may not actually ever do because that space is
yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I do wonder if the answer for this would be system numerics, some other sub namespace if we think appropriate, color ARGB32, right? And that it lives in some layer. We get rid of most of these conversion operators. You build it from the bytes, or we make it so that colors can easily go to this, but that we don't necessarily take the dependency on system.drawing so we can see those types. Because Emo did have a layering.
Well, we can add, if we really want it there, and we can do that, and we can have the operators on color from, we already have a dependency on numerics, right? So
so it would be inverting the relationship. The color knows how to turn itself into the number, but that the number doesn't know how to turn itself into a color. In particular, right now there's an implicit operator that goes from color to one of these, and then an implicit operator that goes back, but that will lose information in the meantime. So since that is a lossy translation, at least one of them needs to not be implicit.
So if we were to do that, then I think Jeremy and I need to sit down and briefly discuss, and Prashant as well, and discuss what that would look like in numerics and what color types we think are needed, not just for system.drawing and WinForms, but also for graphics-based applications as well. And my initial thought is it would be system numerics colors as the namespace, and this would just be ARGB32. That is distinct and unique to anyone using colors, so it's not going to be terrible, and that would give us space to also expose things like BGRA32, RGBA 128, and other types as appropriate. But theoretically, given there's 130 pixel formats supported by Vulkan and DirectX, that could become unwieldy. And so we have to find the right balance between what are the core types that most applications will want to work with and deal with as far as surface formats are concerned, and what is reasonable for vectorized algorithms to expose for like HSL conversions.
Okay, so I think that that figuring out what the specific scenario and layering is before we just add it and wish we'd added it somewhere else. That if you guys can go offline and do that, then that'll give something to talk about in a re-review. But I feel like what we're trying to do right now is somewhere halfway between what we have and what we think we want, and I don't know that we've decided that we like the halfway or it's just convenient, and it feels like it's the latter.
Yeah, and I think the outcome of the discussion is either going to be we don't think we ever want to add more color types to numerics because it's too complex of a space, and so this should just go in drawing, or we are, and it's going to be like system numerics something, in which case some existing image library authors will need to be consulted and may not like the approach.
It may probably not strong enough a word.
Yeah, which is why we've kind of pushed out and rejected the other proposals for these areas so far in the general sense and not the drawing WinForm specific sense.
Yeah, that just that was my feel on the other stuff, is that if we were going to manage to get consensus on that thing, that it was going to be quite a ways out before we could figure that out. So to me it seemed not much of a weight to be taking to be throwing this inside of what's essentially our old school drawing library.
But it's we don't want to add one now and then add another one in the next release or whatever. So and then other things are figure out which relationship this and color should have, which one should feel lower level. Emo's gut was this is lower level, so it should not know about color, but color should know about it. And then in general, implicit operators are the wrong idea. So decide when they're really actually appropriate, and then that we didn't like the enum because you already have it as the dot value property. The enum didn't buy anything. Those were the feelings that we had. You can come back with other arguments.
The just as a quick thing on the AR, having enums for defining invokes, which we do in a ton of these things, and I guess we could just avoid it. But like, that's
No, I think it's fine.
That's
You can do
always
it, just don't make them
safe is
public.
using that. So it's a convenience thing. So I guess that's I'll talk more with Tanner offline about it. I don't know.
I mean,
how
my
much-
other question is like, talk to the Maui guys whether they want some color representation as well, because if there is some sort of like, okay, we need kind of kind of like a lower level general usable color representation or types within that vicinity that we want to have, then I think there's enough meat behind it. If you just want this as an interrupt kind of thing within system drawing, I think the proposed shape, even knowing about color, seems fine because you don't want to make it lower level, right? It's just kind of a more lightweight thing within drawing / within WinForms, right? And that seems also fine. But
And that's fundamentally what I was trying to do, and then also have some little extra convenience for interop. Well, it's as that's what the lower enum thing is, but like the key thing is that like passing around arrays of these things and like working with them is painful when it's color, because you can't use it as it is. You have to like unwrap it all and then wrap it back up again, and it's
right.
That's not ideal.
But you can't use it for virtualized colors, right? Like system colors, right?
Well, there's that concept's. That's why color is so complicated, right? Is because it's containing multiple concepts in the same thing. So yes, this wouldn't be appropriate for system color, and I think if we went back, we probably wouldn't have defined it the way we did. But maybe we would have. It's pretty painful to work with. So
yeah, I think if you have a chat with Tanner and you just scope it to interrupt within WinForms and drawing, I think then we can get this to a state where we can approve it.
Right, but again, if Maui also wants a similar thing, then maybe we end up with numerics color ARGB 32 and color ABGR 32 because that's what Maui decided that they're going to do, because that's what pings do, and that like, ta-da! Now we have the two that we added at one time, and now we've explained why there's a namespace and that we may add other things. And so I think you're good. You're right to say we should reconcile what Maui wants as their color primitive before we add a new type.
There's also the case that Levi brought up, which is that if we're willing to break back compat with the binary serializer, we could change color to no longer track the other information and to do lookups instead, assuming that it won't kill perf to do so.
We don't have to trash compat with binary serialization for that. What we would end up trashing compat with is the ability to specify your own arbitrary string as the color name. Yeah. But we can absolutely make binary formatter back compat work, even if we change the implementation of the struct.
So if we change the implementation of the struct, I mean, it still would never match directly, because there's that people do rely on that concept for system color, right? Where they expect it to be up to date.
Right, but you can use a lookup table from the value to the color.
Well, see, there is, color in the raw color. There's no information that that's a system color, right? So I'm not following you.
Yeah, you wouldn't want black to change to purple just because somebody changed their text color.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I forgot that the system colors are dynamically changeable, not.
Yeah.
Not
and we
values.
do currently. I did change it for perf reasons to look it up every time, which sort of seems ironic at first, but like that was necessary because we were actually loading a window to do that before to do it to cache it all. So like if you accessed anything in system drawing, like color itself, you would end up, you know, creating a background window that would sit there and wait for a system to say it was changing anything. So, yeah. So yeah, this is an interesting spec.
Okay, so I think we're leaving. I guess we're promoting it to open needs work, which is going to make Emo's tool upset, but whatever.
No, that one should be handled, unless I fucked up. But like we have done that before.
You're going to get 2 video links for the 2 different times we discussed it. Yeah, that's what I mean by it'll make your tool upset.
Oh yeah, you will only get you basically get the second one, right? And then yeah, that's fair.
So, Jeremy, I am going to get my shot here, my second shot here in about an hour. So I may be out tomorrow, depending on how I feel. So if you want to schedule something for Thursday,
Okay.
or later for you, me, Prashant, and maybe Santi, then I think we could.
Santi's
probably...
out, isn't he, or is he?
Right. I keep forgetting Santi's out on parental leave. Then just us. Then we should be able to come to some reasonable conclusion.
Okay.
All right. So I added about 1/10 of that as a note, and moved it to needs work. So, and we're 15 minutes over, and I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there's any pending YouTube comments. So
I don't think there are.
With that, I think it's time to call it a day.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thanks everyone.